Jimmy Page is a legend, a guitar god, the mastermind behind Led Zeppelin. But what if I told you there were guitarists who actually terrified him? Not in a horror movie sense, but on a level that shook his confidence, challenged his ego, and forced him to raise his game. These weren't just good guitarists. They were players so talented, Page admired them and feared them. Stay with us till the end, because the final name on this list, let's just say Page once refused to play in front of him. That's how deep the fear ran. Let's begin with the first wave of guitarists who made Jimmy Page nervous to pick up his Les Paul. 1. Jeff Beck. Before Led Zeppelin, there was the Yardbirds. And before Jimmy Page joined, Jeff Beck was already bending strings like a madman. The two shared a unique rivalry, friends, but fierce competitors. When Page finally joined the Yardbirds, he actually played bass just to be in the same band as Beck. That's how much respect he had. And when they eventually played twin lead guitars, Page admitted that Beck's raw innovation made him second-guess his own playing. Beck had this wild, unpredictable energy. He could go from blues to jazz fusion in a single solo. Page, always calculated and technical, found Beck's looseness both inspiring and intimidating. Beck didn't just play, he attacked the guitar. Years later, Page would call Beck the most unique player of them all. And that's coming from a man who'd seen it all. 2. Eric Clapton. Another Yardbirds alumni, Clapton was already a god in the British blues scene before Page even joined. Known as Slowhand, Clapton's phrasing and emotional touch on the guitar terrified Page in a different way. While Page was a studio wizard with blistering technique, Clapton had soul. His work with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and later Cream, made Page sit up and reevaluate his own blues vocabulary. Clapton once told an interviewer, "Page is great, but he thinks too much." That stuck with Page for years. He knew Clapton could improvise with an effortless depth that was hard to copy. It wasn't about speed, it was about feeling. And that's what made Clapton such a dangerous player. 3. Ritchie Blackmore. Blackmore wasn't just a rival, he was a threat. The Deep Purple shredder had classical influences, lightning speed, and a stage presence that could match Zeppelin any night of the week. Page once commented that Blackmore had a lot of fire and incredible dexterity. The problem? Blackmore hated Page. He thought Zeppelin was overhyped, and he was out to prove it. The two never saw eye to eye. But behind the scenes, Page respected Blackmore's skill deeply, especially his ability to merge classical runs with heavy rock riffs. Songs like Highway Star or Burn made even Page raise his eyebrows. What terrified him most wasn't just Blackmore's playing, it was his ambition to outdo Led Zeppelin at every turn. 4. Pete Townshend. Townshend wasn't technically superior, but his power was unmatched. The way he played guitar was more like a weapon of mass destruction. Page once said that watching the Hulu was like being hit by a freight train. Townshend's aggressive chords, feedback mastery, and stage violence pushed Page to rethink his entire approach to live shows. The power chord became a tool of war, and Page took notes. Townshend was also one of the first to use massive Marshall stacks. When Page saw that wall of sound in action, he realized that technique wasn't enough. You needed volume, energy, and chaos. Page wasn't scared of Townshend's solos. He was scared of the impact. 5. Jimi Hendrix. Now we're talking real fear. When Hendrix exploded onto the scene in London, it was like a UFO had landed. Every guitarist, including Page, was floored. Page admitted in interviews that he couldn't understand how Hendrix did what he did. It wasn't just his playing, it was the swagger, the showmanship, the cosmic tone. Page knew that no matter how good he got, Hendrix would always feel otherworldly. That's intimidating. One night, in 1967, Hendrix walked into a club where Page was about to jam. Page left. ... No lie. He didn't want to play in front of Hendrix. And who could blame him? We've just scratched the surface. These 5 guitarists pushed Jimmy Page to the edge of his ability, and in some cases, made him question his place in the hierarchy. But the real psychological warfare? That came later, with the next generation of players. Guitarists who weren't just contemporaries, but successors. And their skills? Let's just say, Page wasn't ready for them. By the mid-70s, Jimmy Page was a living legend. Stairway to Heaven, Kashmir. Dazed and confused, he had written the book on guitar, Heroism. But just as Zeppelin soared, a new crop of players began to emerge. They weren't just influenced by Page, they were gunning to replace him. And that's what truly terrified him. These were players who studied Page's every move, and then decided to play faster, louder, and with even more fire. Here are 5 young guns who made Jimmy Page realize that the throne doesn't stay warm forever. 6. Eddie Van Halen. If there was one moment that truly shook Jimmy Page, it was hearing Eruption for the first time. Eddie Van Halen didn't just play fast, he played differently. Two-handed tapping, wild dive bombs, harmonics like explosions. It sounded like an alien transmission. Page was known for his hammer-ons and pull-offs, but Eddie made it look prehistoric. The first time Page heard Van Halen, he reportedly said, "I don't even know what I'm listening to." That's not disrespect, it's awe. Eddie made every guitar god of the 70s suddenly feel like they were from the Stone Age. Even Robert Plant admitted that Led Zeppelin wouldn't have survived if Eddie had arrived earlier. That's how revolutionary Van Halen was. And for Page, it was a wake-up call. His dominance had an expiration date. 7. Randy Rhoads. While Eddie was all chaos and flash, Randy Rhoads was precise, elegant, and lethal. His neoclassical style, honed with Ozzy Osbourne, brought a level of discipline to shredding that Page had never faced before. Where Page was loose and raw, Rhoads was calculated and flawless. His solos on songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley were like operas, grand, structured, and terrifying in their technical perfection. Randy was one of the first metal guitarists to truly merge classical music theory with arena rock. Page had experimented with violin bows, but Rhoads was out here building sonatas in distortion. Page once said in an interview that Rhoads was doing things I never dared to try. And that sums it up. Rhoads was fearless in a way that made Page pause and reflect. 8. Yngwie Malmsteen. If Eddie was the fire and Randy was the structure, then Yngwie Malmsteen was the dragon. This Swedish virtuoso exploded onto the scene in the early 80s like a bolt of lightning, playing at speeds most thought impossible. His Baroque shredding and over-the-top ego terrified everyone, not just Page. When asked about Malmsteen, Page didn't offer much, but those who knew him said he was stunned by Yngwie's ability to turn Paganini-style violin solos into metal anthems. It wasn't just fast, it was intellectual, and that's what made it so unnerving. Malmsteen made Page seem mortal. Compared to the sheer velocity and precision of Yngwie's solos, even Zeppelin's wildest jams began to feel dated. That's a harsh truth, but one Page was well aware of. 9. Joe Satriani. By the late 80s, guitar playing had become a technical Olympics, and no one embodied that more than Joe Satriani. Smooth, melodic, and surgically precise, Satriani didn't just play notes. He spoke with them. He wasn't a wild man like Hendrix or a monster like Van Halen. Satriani was a professor with distortion pedals. Page, who often relied on feel and studio magic, had to admit, guys like Satriani were operating on a different wavelength. Satch could play any scale in any key over any time signature and make it sound like a movie soundtrack. What terrified Page wasn't just Satriani's playing, it was the fact that guys like him were everywhere now. The new standard wasn't just to be great, it was to be perfect. 10. Steve Vai. And then came Vai. If Satriani was the professor, Vai was the mad scientist. A student of Satriani, and a performer with Frank Zappa, David Lee Roth, and Whitesnake. Steve Vai turned guitar, playing into performance art. He played 7-string guitars before it was cool. He used whammy bars, filters, harmonizers, lights, and even built custom guitars with extra frets. He didn't just play songs. He built experiences. Page, with all his mystique and occult symbolism, had always been considered a visionary, but Vai made even that seem tame. Vai wasn't trying to be Page. He was reinventing what a guitarist could be. There's a story that when Page saw a live video of Vai playing For the Love of God, he sat silently and said, "That's not even guitar anymore. That's something else." And he was right. Vai had moved beyond the blues-rooted solo. He was building soundscapes from scratch. These new era guitarists didn't just match Jimmy Page. They forced him to evolve or be left behind. Some made him respect the next generation. Others made him wonder if his time was up. But the fear, it was always there. Not fear of failure, but fear of irrelevance. But here's the twist. Some guitarists terrified Page not because they were better or faster, but because they did things he never dared to try.